Hi guys, good afternoon. It is 1 p.m. on a Monday and I'm meteorologist Alexandra Cranford, and today we are talking about a weather lesson that has to do with bird migration. So this is something that some people know about. I actually don't know all that much about this. I want to thank first of all Professor Peter Yockey from Holy Cross University for providing me with tons of information about bird migrations. So I'm kind of new to it. I'm learning just like maybe some of you are, and so I wanted to talk about that today because the bird migrations are happening right now and they continue through early May. And this is for mainly birds moving across the Gulf of Mexico, and it is mainly nocturnal at night. Something cool that we have as meteorologists with our radar is the ability to detect and to be able to see sometimes these flocks of birds and these, areas where we can see on radar where the birds are taking off or sometimes alighting. So you can see behind me, actually, this is a backwards map probably because of selfie mode, but just the general idea with the greens that you see. This was from last week, and our radar was showing kind of this big mass in the green of something moving from the south to the north. And you might have thought, oh, it could be a shower or something like that, but it was actually birds taking off in the evening and kind of hitting the radar beams, hitting them, detecting them as they continue their path to the north, and of course migrating as we get into the winter, into the summer, trying to move from the south to the north to cooler territory. So we have these migrations happening, and they continue until roughly about May 10th. So billions of birds migrate between the tropics and North America each year, and they have names: neotropical migrants, or what we are interested in and what we often see in South Louisiana are trans-Gulf migrants. So they would be, of course, moving across the Gulf of Mexico and not taking a track along Florida or Texas, but just moving right across the coast, or the Gulf toward our coast. So New Orleans ends up, even the North Shore and places right along the coast, right in the path of some of these migrating birds. So the most dramatic echoes that we see on radar often happen because the grounded birds, or those of you who are interested in birds and already know about this, some of you, what we would call a fallout, apparently, where the birds have something that causes them to stay in a particular location. When these grounded birds resume their migration and take off, that is when the radar beams can a lot of times detect them and show them, especially in the evening. And so, for example, this one happened this past Tuesday, so not quite a week ago. And again, we still have well into the first week or so of May for these to continue, so something that we'll be watching for. So these birds are moving across the Gulf of Mexico. Usually at night is when they would make their trip, and they would launch from Yucatan around nightfall and then migrate during the night and reach the Gulf Coast during daylight. So sometimes they don't even see land yet by sunrise. Sometimes it would be early afternoon, kind of on the average, that they would find land and make their way to the ground. They're flying at altitudes, by the way, of 2,000 to 5,000 or so feet. So a lot of times when this happens at night, of course, radar beams aren't picking up on that. It's more when they're either kind of coming to the ground or taking off. The peak arrival time, again, is early afternoon. It can apparently, though, be as early as kind of mid-morning, coming all the way from Yucatan across the Gulf of Mexico. If conditions are just right, it can be early in the morning even. And sometimes if conditions are not great, it can be more like evening or even a little bit later than that. So if you have good weather and you have a tailwind, they sometimes continue passing and flying north of the coast. So even after that huge trek across the Gulf of Mexico, they don't alight necessarily right when they see land. If things are good, they will keep going north, across New Orleans, across the lake, and even farther north of the North Shore. If it's bad weather, though, and this is where weather comes into it, if there's rain or a front or something like that, that creates conditions where they're kind of struggling. So they're moving from south to north, and if we get a front, that would bring in north winds, and so that would make it hard. They would be struggling against these strong north winds. So that would be a time where it takes longer to cross the Gulf of Mexico, and also for opportunities for them to kind of settle and what is called falling out as they get toward the Gulf Coast on our part of South Louisiana. So they continue moving to the north. How to see them, if you're interested in that, would be either to watch the woods, especially an area that you kind of have seen a lot of vegetation, especially toward the ground, and kind of like a densely wooded kind of forest area. For example, last week, Professor Yockey said there were 80 species that were sighted at City Park alone. So pretty cool that you can see that many birds just within one day or so. You can also listen, especially at night. So if any of, especially my student friends, are interested in getting into bird watching and kind of paying attention to birds, you can not only watch your woods, but also listen at night. You will hear small single notes from overhead, and the best time would be around 9 p.m. or so, especially when there are south winds. So you can hear sometimes a fallout from near the coast passing overhead here. So that's what you would be listening for. And then another thing is that if you have binoculars at a nighttime, because again, these migrations happen mainly at night, and if there is a full moon, like there is one coming up on May 7th, sometimes if you have binoculars and you look just right, you can see the bird silhouettes apparently, and it can be anything from just little specks to maybe even a general sort of bird form that you can see way, way overhead. So that'll be something to watch for if you want to do that. May 7th is the next full moon, and it can be, you know, a few nights before and after that. So a couple of cool notes that I have learned, and again, I'm kind of learning about this topic as well as maybe some of you guys. I'm sure many of you may be more well-versed in it than I am, of course, so just trying to get you some information about it. The males go before the females to stake out nesting spots, and males sing more and often are brighter color. So sometimes you can get kind of a little bit of a flashier show apparently in April as opposed to May in our area. Also, the cold fronts that would cause the birds to come to the ground because, you know, the north winds are strong and it's difficult for them to keep moving to the north. Those cold fronts, of course, happen earlier in the year as opposed to when we get into May. So, for example, we have a front moving in on Wednesday, so that may be something that we kind of watch for then. So, for all these reasons, late April is really a good time to kind of watch for these migrations and get into this. And again, it will last all the way until about May 10th, and then apparently it kind of drops off quickly after that. So, this is something to see, and we'll keep watching radar for signs of these birds migrating from the south to the north. And then we also have a cool site that is showing the volume of birds, and I showed this on the new newscast. It's a Cornell site from Cornell University, and it is called birdcast.info. And so just to give you an idea about what it looks like, this is, you know, a map of the US, obviously not looking the best because of selfie mode, but notice the yellows and whites kind of in the central part of the US, and especially around Texas and Louisiana and even into Arkansas. It's very easy. It's a cool site you can go to if you're interested in this, and you can get a forecast for how the bird migration will be, or whether you'll be able to see it and so forth. So tonight it's looking decent, and actually tomorrow night, Tuesday night, also looking decent for our part of Louisiana if you are interested in that. So again, I will post the link to that site in just a little bit. And weather and bird migration, of course, something very interesting to consider, because again, as I mentioned, if the weather's great, they will just continue migrating. Everything goes as planned, and they don't really necessarily even have to stop along the coast before they continue past New Orleans. But there are things that can influence the birds and kind of bring them to a halt and make them find a place to stop if things get difficult and if they start to struggle with things. So for example, cold fronts, because you would have, instead of a tailwind helping them move, you would have a headwind from the north. And apparently Coudery Forest in City Park is a really good place to kind of see these birds when they do encounter something difficult and they need to alight somewhere in New Orleans and get to the ground. Apparently that is a good spot in City Park. And sometimes they can stay for a few days. And you would probably want to look either the day of a cold front or the day after. So potentially maybe later this week, but we'll see. Another thing of how weather influences them is, of course, intense or widespread rain events. So if you have a lot of rain, they will pause instead of struggling against the rain. Also, rain can create brief, ponding of water, some pools of water where they sometimes like to stay. And Professor Yockey said along Lakeshore Drive can be a good spot for that. So if you ever are around there during a rain event, kind of at this time of year, potentially there could be some birds taking a stop and trying not to struggle through the rain. It is brief though with the rain events, so it's good to look while it's still raining. Another thing, of course, is tropical weather. So when we have a storm close to our coast, that would displace coastal birds farther inland, and sometimes it can be hundreds of miles. Even flamingos apparently have appeared along the Gulf Coast from way south. So the spot to look for that would be like a big body of water, like, for example, Lake Pontchartrain, where birds would show up there. Also kind of along or east of the track of a tropical storm or tropical system is potentially where the birds would kind of be located when they need to take a stop. And then another thing is extended drought. So in other places, someone's talking about the crows. I know I have crazy crows outside of my window as well. In fact, that's why I closed the window before I started talking. They've been so loud. But the last thing is extended drought, another weather condition that can create, an opportunity to see some birds here as well. So when you have an extended drought, other places may kind of lose some of those pools of water in places where the birds would go, and they may end up showing up here where there is more water. An example would be Bayou Sauvage National Wildlife Refuge, where apparently there are a couple of spots to go that are especially good for seeing birds when that kind of event happens. And that would be a more kind of gradual, extended sort of thing. So this has been fun for me because I don't really know that much about bird migration. Thank you so much for joining me for this topic, because it's been really fun for me to dive into this and get all this cool information. And again, thank you to Professor Yockey for all of that information, kind of the ins and outs about how to get into birding, or how to be a birder in South Louisiana. A lot of people interested in that. And so this is the time, of course, where the migrations are happening. And again, the best time to kind of see some of that action would be potentially maybe afternoon, and in some cases evening. And then of course the birds are moving across the Gulf of Mexico at night. It's a nocturnal event, but arriving here again, kind of on average in the afternoon, but it can be earlier or later depending on the weather conditions that we talked about. So I think that will do it for today. We've been talking about birds. Tomorrow we're going to talk, I think, as we're anticipating another front at the middle of the week, we'll talk about some storm conditions, and we're going to be baking later this week too. So this is our kind of beginning of the week sort of weather lessons setup. Remember, I am on here at 1 p.m. on WWL's Facebook Live on the afternoons, Monday through Wednesday. And you can also find all the weather lessons if you're interested in that, or if you know a student or a kid who wants to see some of these science lessons. It's all on YouTube too, which I will provide the link for in the comments in just a second. So you can go there and you can see all the videos that we've done for weeks now, of course, as our distancing and kind of situation continues. So you guys, hope you have a good rest of the day. Thanks for joining me for this weather lesson. We will be talking more, of course, later this week. I hope you have a great afternoon, and it is completely gorgeous outside. I really hope everyone can get outside and enjoy the beautiful weather today. Tomorrow looking good too, and then we're looking for some rain on Wednesday, as I mentioned. So have a good rest of the day. Have a good rest of the week. I'll see you guys on Facebook Live tomorrow for another weather lesson. Take care.